Welcome to video 2 of chapter 4, where we will look at some of the basics of molecular genetics, particularly the role of genes, chromosomes, and DNA. So our genetic inheritance begins at conception. An egg meets a sperm, and they unite to form a zygote. So a zygote just means a fertilized egg. It is a single cell. Once the egg and sperm unite to form one single cell, in that first cell we call a zygote. Fertilization or conception mean the same thing. When the egg meets the sperm, the sperm fertilizes the egg, more technically. Okay, so within every cell of your body, you have a nucleus that contains your genetic information. And this will consist of 23 chromosomes from each parent. Okay? And these chromosomes pair up to form 23 pairs of chromosomes. So the egg and the sperm each contained 23 single chromosomes. So the sperm, obviously 23 chromosomes from your father, 23 chromosomes from your mother were in the egg. They pair up and form that zygote. Now you have 23 pairs. And the pairs go together. Okay? We'll look at a picture on the next slide in a moment. We call 22 of these pairs autosomes. That just means they're not particularly special pairs, but the 23rd pair, the one that we consider the final pair, it has a special name. It's called they're called the sex chromosomes because they determine the sex of the offspring. We label that pair of chromosomes as either XX or XY. The X chromosome is larger than the Y chromosome. Your mother always submits an X chromosome that it's carried in her egg. From your mother, you always get the X chromosome. Your father's chromosome that determines whether you're born male or female. If the father contributes an X chromosome and you end up with an XX pairing, then you turn out to be female. If your father's sperm contains a Y chromosome, then you get the XY pairing, and this makes you into a male at birth. So the father's sperm, as it says here, determines the sex of the child depending on which type of chromosome the fertilizing sperm carries with it. And once again, these 23 pairs of chromosomes, duplicates of these 23 pairs are contained in every cell, inside the nucleus of every cell of your body. These chromosomes are responsible for determining everything biologically about you. What type of hair you're going to have, and your eye color, and just that you're mainly going to look human and have 2 arms and 2 legs, and normally 5 fingers on each hand and 5 toes on each foot. I mean, unless there's genetic problems. So the genes determine how you form, and in visual ways. It also determines your characteristics and traits that you're born with. Things like temperament and basic personality traits and intelligence and things like that. They kind of give a starting point to all of those traits and behaviors before the influence of nurture starts to impact on your development. So here's a picture of 23 pairs of chromosomes. You can tell that this is a male. I mean, because it's labeled normal male, but also because if you look at the 23rd pair, you see an X chromosome with a Y chromosome. So take note right now how much shorter, smaller the Y chromosome is compared to the X chromosome. This will be important later when we look at something called X-linked inheritance. So all the other pairs, the autosomes from 1 to 22, you can see that they match up in size. Each pair matches up in size because they contain the same basic types of genes on each member of each pair. So just as an example, I don't know where eye color is located, but let's just say at the very top of the left pair of number 1, let's say my eye color gene from my father's up there. Then at the very top of the right pair of number 1 would be the eye color gene from my mother. So they pair up across from each other. So the same type of genetic information is contained all along the pair of chromosomes. One chromosome coming from your father, one from your mother, and together they will determine your characteristics. Okay. Let's go on here. One very important undertaking in the scientific community was called the Human Genome Project. Sorry, sometimes I can't talk right, or most of the time. Anyways, this ran from 1990 to 2003, 13 years, and it was conducted by hundreds or maybe even thousands of scientists around the world in many different labs. So it was a mutual undertaking by a variety of scientists to try to map out the human genome, meaning to identify all the genes within a normal human. And so it was a massive undertaking. I mean, it took 13 years with all these various research labs and scientists, working towards it. And this was just to identify, particular genes, and not necessarily at that time to understand what the genes do. I mean, that was kind of a later step, and that's what they've been working on since then. But just to kind of pick out how many genes we have and give them labels. We found out through the Human Genome Project that a surprising result that the human genome, genome just means your complete set of genes. The word genome means your complete set of genes. That the human genome contains between 20 to 25,000 genes. And this was very surprising. Why is there a range there? Well, different sources kind of come up with different numbers. Your book says 25,000, so that's what we're going to go with for testing purposes. Okay, we'll go with the number your book supplies, but there are many other sources, and we'll see in a video shortly that say it's closer to 20,000. Okay, and I've seen that number in other places as well, but for testing purposes, we're going to say 25. Anyways, it's somewhere between 20 to 25,000. Was this result surprising? Well, scientists expected to find at least 100,000 genes within a human, because of all the various proteins that are manufactured within humans to make all of our characteristics. I mean, proteins are produced to make your eye color, and proteins are produced to make your hair straight or curly, and proteins are produced to give you 2 legs and 5 toes, and determine, I don't know, skin color and various aspects of your brain and characteristics of you as a person. Anyways, we have so many proteins produced that they thought that there would have to be at least as many genes as there are proteins, because there's over 100,000 different proteins that are produced within a human. And they thought originally that it was kind of a 1-to-1 type of arrangement, that one gene would produce one type of protein. So there would have to be at least as many genes as there are proteins. what turned out not to be the case. We discovered through this project that, that genes interact and they can be responsible for producing multiple proteins. One particular gene may influence the production of I don't know how many, but many different proteins, not just one. We have less genes, for instance, than a grain of rice. Okay. And so we thought we'd have to have more genes than at least a grain of rice. A grain of rice has between about 46 to 56,000 genes, and we have 20 to 25,000 genes. So we thought our complexity would come from having many more genes than things like a grain of rice, but that's not the case. Our complexity comes from the fact that our genes do so much. I mean, that they're responsible for one gene can be responsible for many different functions. Okay, so genes determine everything about our genetic inheritance, as I've been saying, physically and characteristics and mentally and things like that, at least the starting point. We actually, by now we know about what half of these genes actually do, what they're responsible for. I mean, the work is ongoing to discover the purpose of each gene and which genes combine to influence different things like genetic disorders or diseases, as well as different characteristics of humans. Okay, let's go on here. Okay, so your chromosomes, those 23 pairs of chromosomes are made up of genes. So one chromosome, like we have 23 pairs and we have somewhere between 20 to 25,000 genes. So on average, a pair of chromosomes probably has, somewhere in the neighborhood of about 1,000 genes that make up a single pair of chromosomes. Because, if there was 1,000 for each pair, that would come out to 23,000 genes. And we know that's somewhere in the ballpark. So roughly, and certainly some chromosomes have more genes than others, but roughly you can imagine, somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,000 genes making up a single pair of chromosomes. And remember, as the chromosomes line up, there's the genes match up. So there would be like 1,000 on the left member of the pair, 1,000 on the right member of the pair, and that would create like 1,000, pair of genes, because they always come in pairs, except in one case that we'll get to shortly. But okay, genes are made up of DNA. So going from big to small, like we have a nucleus, it contains your chromosomes, your 23 pairs. The chromosomes, segments of the chromosomes, like are genes. So you can kind of like slice up a chromosome into a whole bunch of little segments, and the actual material that makes up the genes and the chromosomes is what we call DNA. So it's like a thread-like structure. So if you could like unravel a single chromosome, it would be like a huge thread, and segments of it would be your genes, and the actual thread would be the DNA. I mean, it's the material that makes up your genes and chromosomes. Let's watch a short video that kind of gets into some of the basics about our genes and DNA. Oops, sorry. Okay, I'm gonna go over there now. Let me just click a couple of settings here, and we will watch this video together. Okay.
Your body is made up of 50 trillion cells. Cells come in many different varieties, with many different functions. But inside almost every cell is a nucleus, containing 99.9% of your genes, and mitochondria. All told, you have nearly 20,000 genes.
we're not going to worry about the mitochondria. Okay, we're not going to really get into that. So don't worry too much about it. That I don't talk about them. So here we can see this source says 20,000 genes. Remember, your book says 25,000. That would be the answer on a test, because we're sticking to what the book says for this figure. Oops.
Your genes are small parts of a long molecule called DNA, or deoxyribonucleic acid. If you lined up all of the DNA containing all of your genes, it would measure 6 feet long. But it's coiled so tightly that it fits in just one cell nucleus. DNA is a double-stranded molecule composed of sugar, phosphate, and 4 different bases: adenine, thymine, cytosine,
okay, I'm
and
just going to pause
guanine.
again here. So we have these 4 bases, and what I want you to notice is that the adenine and the thymine are always paired up together. So like you can see they're always across from each other. So the A and T, you can see they're linked where the words are. Okay, so A's and T's always go together as a pair. C's and G's always go together as a pair. The cytosine and the guanine. Okay, so that doesn't ever change. And that's true of whether you're a human or a grain of rice. It's the same 4 bases. What's important is just the ordering of them. And so there's many different possibilities, different ways to order these pairs.
These bases spell out the language known as the genetic code. The number and order of these 4 bases determine, for example, whether you are a chimp, a cow, a banana, or a human. Most genes are recipes for making specific proteins. These recipes are passed down from parents to children, from generation to generation. When someone says, "You have your father's hair," what they mean is, you appear to have inherited a gene or genes from your father that makes a protein that instructs your hair follicle cells to produce hair that curls like your father's. But they usually opt for the shorter version. Genes tell a cell how to function and what traits to express. More specifically, gene regulators turn different genes on and off in different cells to control cell function. The long molecules of DNA containing your genes are organized into pieces called chromosomes. Different species have different numbers of chromosomes. Humans usually have 46 chromosomes, 2 sets of 23, or simply 23 pairs of chromosomes. Chimpanzees have 2 sets of 24, or 24 pairs of chromosomes. Rhesus monkeys have 21 pairs of chromosomes. Cows have 30 pairs of chromosomes. Chickens have 39 pairs. Fruit flies have 4 pairs. And bananas have 11 pairs. So, what percentage of the DNA in your chromosomes do you share with other species? You share 93% of your DNA with the rhesus monkey and 98.5% with our friend chimpanzee. How about with other humans? 99.5%.
I always find this amazing that, as much as we tend to see differences between people and we, if you just take an average 2 people, I mean, they might might have different hair and then skin color and different traits and intelligence and characteristics and personality, and yet we are, genetically we're 99.5% similar to one another. And so it's only that last 0.5% that causes the differences that we see among humans. Oops. Sorry, I'm losing control here. Sorry, I can't. Oh, my computer's not working. I can't get back up. Go, go, go. Okay. You just got a little bit left here. Oh, now this doesn't work. Go.
So, what makes us different from one another? Well,
Okay,
for one
we're
thing,
not talking about
SNPs.
Don't worry about SNPs at all. So I'm going to go back to our PowerPoint. Let me just put a couple of buttons here, and okay, here we go. Okay, so let me point out to you that these 4 bases that I have here that make up DNA, they're not paired up correctly. I should really correct this sometime, but remember, A and T go together, so you can kind of they're like you draw an X through those 4. So A and T go together, G and C always go together. Okay, and it's the order of these bases that determines which proteins are produced, which determine all of your characteristics. Okay, so that's some real basics of DNA, genes, and chromosomes. And now we'll move into Mendelian inheritance, dominant and recessive genes. So it's called Mendelian inheritance because it was first discovered by Gregor Mendel back in 1866. So, approximately a little over 150 years ago. What he did was he studied inheritance in pea plants. He kept mating, different pea plants together to produce offspring, and he would study how similar or different the offspring was to the parents that were paired together to produce the pea plant offspring, and so he discovered this whole concept of dominant and recessive genes. He really is credited with beginning the modern study of genetics through these pea plant studies. So that's why he's very famous. And why we call it Mendelian inheritance. Okay, each gene from the father is paired with a gene from the mother, as I was saying earlier. They're paired right across from one another on pairs of chromosomes. Each pair of genes is made up of some combination of dominant and recessive genes. The genes that are present at a particular location on the chromosome are called the genotype. So that's the actual, what actual genes do you have for that characteristic. So I mentioned eye color earlier. So, you have one gene for eye color from your father, one from your mother. So the particular genes you have from each parent, that is your genotype, the genetic material. What we see when we look at a person's bodily traits and characteristics is called the phenotype. So the phenotype is the observable characteristic. Like if you walked up to me, you could look and say, hey, Kevin, you got blue eyes. That's my phenotype for eye color. Okay. My genotype is what pair of genes makes up my blue eye color. Okay. So phenotype is observable. The genotype is the actual genes. Out of the pair of genes that you inherit for something like eye color, and right now we're talking about there's certain things are just determined by a single pair of genes. Other things like, for instance, intelligence or personality, they are determined by multiple genes, not just like a single pair. But something simple like eye color, it's just one gene from each parent that determines your eye color. All right, so out of that pair, the dominant genes will be expressed in your phenotype. So if there's a dominant gene, it is what's going to be showing up as my eye color. If I get one dominant eye color gene, I have that eye color. So recessive genes only get expressed if they're paired with another recessive gene. So for eye color, I can tell you that brown is a dominant color. If either of your parents give you a brown-eyed gene, you will have brown eyes. Blue eyes, on the other hand, are a recessive characteristic or a recessive gene. So in order to get blue eyes, you need to receive a blue-eye gene from each parent. It's the only way. So to show a recessive characteristic like blue eyes, you need to get a pair of them, one for each parent. Otherwise, the recessive gene will be overridden by the other dominant gene. So let's take a look at an example here involving eye color. Those big B's, I know this is really hard to see, I know it's in your book though. Those big B's stand for brown eyes. They're capital B's because it is a dominant characteristic. The small B's stand for blue eyes, blue-eyed genes. They're a recessive characteristic. And they're just showing various examples here. So in the first figure on top left, both your parents have carry a pair of brown-eyed genes. They both have a pair of brown-eyed genes in their chromosomes. So every single child they ever have is going to have brown eyes. They're both going to automatically pass a brown-eyed gene because they have no recessive genes. All right, so if they're, and remember in that very top of that first box where it says BB and then BB, remember that's the genotype. And then at the bottom where they come together and it's a that's the phenotype. What actually is the result? Okay, so if your parents only carry brown eye genes, you end up with brown eyes. In the second example, moving to the right, we have one parent with two brown eye genes, one parent, and they would have brown eyes. And you have one parent that had two blue eye genes, they would have blue eyes. All of their children are going to have brown eyes. It doesn't matter that one of the parents has blue eyes in this case, because the one with brown eyes doesn't carry the blue-eyed recessive gene. So they're always going to pass a brown-eyed gene, which is dominant over other eye colors, and every single child will have brown eyes. Even though the children may get a small B they would get a small B from the father, they may end up producing blue-eyed children because they're going to have a mix, a brown and a blue. And if they meet somebody else that has a blue-eyed gene, they can produce blue-eyed children. This is why sometimes characteristics might skip a generation. These parents here, one with two browns, one with two blues, they can only produce brown-eyed children, but their grandchildren may have blue eyes. Okay, because their children are going to carry the recessive blue gene. Okay, in the third example, we have two blue-eyed parents. All of their children are also going to have blue eyes because we know automatically if the parents have blue eyes, they each carry a pair of blue-eyed genes. It's the only way you get blue eyes. So two blue-eyed parents will always produce blue-eyed children. And then in the fourth example, you have a mix. Each parent has one brown and one blue-eyed. Both those parents in the fourth example are going to have brown eyes because their phenotype is going to be brown eyes because the brown gene gets expressed over the blue gene. But they're both carriers of the blue-eyed recessive gene. They may not even know it, but they probably know it because there'd be in their ancestry, there'd be some ancestors that had blue eyes. But so anyways, when they pass their genes on, there are various combinations possible. Okay. Anyways, they could each pass a brown, they could each pass a blue, whatever. One might pass a brown, one blue. In this case, what you end up with is, on average, 75% of their children will have brown eyes because there's four possibilities. That they pass brown, 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 blue, blue, brown, or blue, blue. And it's only that last 1 out of 4 that produce blue-eyed children. So if they have 4 children, you would expect 3 of them to have brown eyes and 1 to have blue. on average, right? It doesn't have to work that way, but we know 25% of the time they will produce blue-eyed children. So anyways, this is how dominant recessive genes work, and to produce the phenotypes that we see in offspring. It all depends on what the parents' genotypes are and which genes they pass. Okay, as I was saying earlier, it's only simple characteristics that rely on a single pair of genes, like your eye color is a simple characteristic. But because most human characteristics are complex, usually many genes act together in order to determine a trait or behavior. We call this polygenic inheritance, many genes interacting together, not just a single pair. So anything that's complex about you, so certainly things like intelligence and abilities and I don't know, personality and temperament. I mean, these things could never be determined by just a single pair. They're too complex. Okay, and we also have what's known as generalist genes, and this was one of the discoveries, that made it possible that we only have between 20 to 25,000 genes. As I was saying earlier, genes aren't responsible for just one thing. So we discovered that we have generalist genes. These are specific type of pleiotropic. They show a specific type of pleiotropic effect. Pleiotropic effect just means that any one gene may influence a variety of outcomes. Okay, so for instance, we have a gene. Humans have a gene that affects both your aggression, and it affects regulating your heart rate. And so it does both. I mean, and that kind of makes some sense, because if you think about aggression, well, when you get aggressive, your heart rate increases. So I mean, so a single gene is responsible for, or at least partially responsible for, both aggression and regulating heart rate. It doesn't just do one thing. So generalist genes are any genes that have this pleiotropic effect. So some genes or combination of genes have a general effect on many related abilities. I'll give you another example just to finish off here. The same genes, they found out that the same genes that influence abilities in reading also influence abilities in language and math. And I mean, it's not surprising that reading would kind of hook up with language, but also mathematics. So there's a group of genes that influence all three, that influence your reading, your language, and your math. And so like I said, there's genes that have multiple effects that influence a variety of abilities. And this is why we can survive with only 20 to 25,000 genes. Okay, and that's our basic introduction to molecular genetics. In the next video, we will talk about genetic disorders and genetic counseling.